Okay, so thank you for joining me. Once again, we'll be talking about geostrategic, sustainable autonomy. The idea, once again, is to give you some time to not focus too much on the technical aspects. I'm sure a lot of you are way better than I am in terms of technical aspects. What I want you to do for these 2 hours, I don't have anything to teach you once again. We're basically equals, we're students, just different perspectives. What I want you to do is think about how you're going to use your work as an engineer for geostrategic independence, something that's not going to be necessarily talked about in classes in terms of engineering. There's going to be a big focus on how much it costs, how much, like how do you make it, physics, and everything. These 2 hours are meant for a different purpose. They're meant to give you some ideas of, like, to plant some ideas, sow some ideas in your brain of, okay, so I do know how it works. I have an idea of how it can be developed, how it can be managed in terms of a project. Now, how do I make it work in my country, and what are the relevant questions I need to ask to have an analysis of my country geostrategic autonomy in terms of energy, and while using renewables, because once again, uh, Iran has a lot of potential, and you're starting with, you have a head start to be a really big uh, stakeholder in the energy sector in your region. Your natural resources will enable you to um, carry the development of renewable energies, but the idea is that we can't use fossil fuel forever. We're going to need to at least reduce its use to the maximum, and that's where you'll also have to think outside of the box, because that's going to be one of my points today, is you will need to think about the other industries and what they need and what you're going to use your energy for, because that will determine how you manage your projects. If you have your goals in mind, not necessarily from your perspective as an engineer, as an energy engineer, but as a perspective of an engineer from another domain, like another specialty of engineering, or even someone who's not in engineering as well, who's not engineering at all, actually, and needs to help you in some way to achieve and carry out your projects. Um, so the idea is, how, like, what questions do I need to ask myself to turn what other people who will have a say in this project, how can I integrate them as constraints, which I can, as an engineer, model and understand and take into account to develop an energy project that uh, not only works technically and economically, but also fits in your country's agenda. Um, so today there are two main points I will be talking about. The first one, well, I kind of want to give you an insight on a once in a generation event, which was the eclipse that happened yesterday in France and in a bit of Europe as well. So you'll see where I'm going once I show you some things. So uh, I don't know if some of you have heard, but there was an eclipse in Europe. Um, and the reason I mentioned the eclipse is I'm gonna share my screen in one sec. There we go. Yeah, that's the one. Okay, so there is the trajectory of the 2026 eclipse that happened yesterday. It might seem like a isolated event, but in terms of energy, it's quite interesting because it shows the relationships between the countries. And the way you can see this is actually through a uh, RTE is the TSO of France. For those of you who are discovering it, I am from France. The TSO, for those of you who might not be familiar with the concept, is the transmission system operator. So it's the stakeholder in the country, the company that's responsible for managing the transmission network, so the networks that links all the big consumers and all the big producers, and also who works with the DSO, so the distribution system operator, who is the person who is going to link your house to the main grid. So RTE has some public data available, and if we look at the data, for example, Eco2 mix. So that's an insight on the French mix of electricity. And what I want to focus on is the eclipse yesterday because it had some impact, and it's quite telling of the impact of the weather and the climate um, in terms of geostrategic autonomy. Okay, one sec. I need to plug my PC. So we are linked with pretty much all our neighbors in Europe. So we have cable linking our grid to theirs, as you can see on this map. Um, I don't know why it's so badly shown, but we'll work with that, I guess. So this is the UK, Ireland. This is Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium. This is Italy. This is Switzerland and Austria, and this is Spain and um, Portugal. So keep dreaming because one day you'll have one of these, and you might be actually in a position that's quite similar to France because you have a lot of resources and you will play a role in Europe that will be similar to the role that the French electricity grid plays in Western Europe. You have the opportunity to make it so for your own region, and uh, the reason why you would want that is to have development levers of action. You want to, if you want peace in your region, you're going to have to work on peace. You're going to have to work on having things to give to people, on the development, on improving the conditions of life. And one of these is having access to energy for basic needs. So warm water, cooking, heating. Maybe not that much in Iran. I don't know how the weather is right now where you are. Right now, it's pretty hot in France. But what I want to show you through this graph is, well, the importance of stability. So, quick introduction to this graph. This is the graph that shows our exports and our imports in terms of energy and depending on our neighbors. And as you can see, so below is exports and above is imports. And what you can see is that during the day, we do have a lot of imports from our lovely neighbors from Germany and Belgium who do have a bit of sun and um, who can also export a bit of excess, but what they cannot do is produce at night steadily and with a stable grid. So quick, uh, you know, quick little insight on the energy mixes of France and our neighbors. So you have the results and the cause. So this was Friday, August 14th. So no, this is today actually. The eclipse was on the 12th, sorry, not yesterday. And if we look at this graph, we'll see that around the time of the eclipse, we did sell a lot of exports. It's not that much because it was in the at the end of the day. A few imports from Spain, actually. I was kind of surprised about that. I thought they'd be completely off, but we have strong exports in this period. You can see that compared to some other dates, we have a bit of excess of exports. Um, so yeah, anyway, and the energy mixes. So EU uh, energy production. Uh, you look at France. Where are we? Okay, France. So 71% nuclear. We do have a lot of nuclear. You look at our neighbors, you have Spain. Spain is a lot of renewable energies, a bit of nuclear, but we're going from 71% to 36.8%, and most of their renewable energy is from solar. This means that basically during the entirety of the night, once the curve of solar production is down, they have to rely heavily on their neighbors, not only during those kinds of times, but also to ensure the stability of their grid. Um, I'm a bit disappointed, actually. I thought it'd be more telling in this graph. Uh, but yeah, you can see there were actually quite some imports. Actually, I'm quite surprised. I probably Switzerland. I say they probably, well, they're not in the European Union, so that's not going to help me. But I think Switzerland has a lot of one other thing that's going to help you building a grid that provides stability for an international network of energy is the ability to provide stability, as we talked about last time. And stability can come from not only nuclear, so that's one of the forms, but it can also come from dams, which Switzerland has a lot of since it's a mountainous country. It's got a lot of rivers. It's able to produce stable electricity at a given frequency, at a given amount of production. So they do have a lot of freedom in regards to this. That is not the case, for example, for our Spanish neighbors who had to rely a lot on solar, bit of nuclear. Germany doesn't have nuclear anymore, so they're 62% renewable energy. That's and solid fuels, so coal as well. Our very green neighbors use a lot of coal, um, and that's a good idea in terms of sustainability. But in terms of geostrategic autonomy, that takes some consideration. Building your grid with a majority of renewable energy means that your production is uh, in majority unpredictable, well, hardly predictable, well, difficulty, let's say, more difficult than with regular, like more traditional means of producing energy. So that's excluding hydro energy. But yeah, and I was going to look at the UK, but the UK is not in the European Union as well. We do sell them some electricity though, because we built a huge cable, and even though they decided to throw a tantrum, we they do need our electricity because they're also heavily relying on wind, offshore wind. I did have a laugh because I think one of the energy providers in the UK was telling their clients, their customers, that they need to reduce their consumption during the eclipse, because otherwise they'd have to start the um, the uh, fossil fuel power plants again. So that was Octopus Energy. Um, it's starting to grow in France, but basically they're a DSO mostly, and they have no like they have n- they can be telling people that if people consume too much, they have to restart the fossil fuel stations, because when you look at the energy mix of the UK, you can see that the solar, like photovoltaics, is like, yeah, 2024. So wind, gas, solar. Solar is this. That's, yeah, something like, I think 5 to 10% of their energy mix, something like this. Yeah, 1.2 here. Anyways, you guys can find a reliable source, but this is one of the points I want to get. Two is you have your stakeholders, and Octopus Energy is going to communicate on how people consume electricities like any DSO, because it is trading energy. It is not selling you energy it produces, it is just trading energy that another company is producing. So that means that it's you're not directly talking to the producer, and you have to take that into account when you are building your projects, because especially if you want to, so if you remember last time I talked about decentralized production, renewable integration in the grids, so smart grids, and how you need to have more redundant, more resilient, more flexible, more transportable, maybe something suited to the supply chain. You're going to be better off having something with a lot of redundancy, something a lot of resilience. So you're going to be better off decentralizing. And this is the kind of state actors you might run into. I don't know exactly how it works in Persia. I've got to say, I didn't do my homework, but I do want to raise your attention on the fact that every stakeholder in the energy sector, uh, and more particularly some who are very close to even the physical constraints of energy, will not have the same stakes as you do as an engineer. And you have to take into account what someone who sells energy, who does not produce, who does not use energy, but someone who is the merchant, the trader of energy, thinks, what they're gonna want to look for. So you're gonna have to provide mitigation strategies. You're gonna have to provide stability. You're gonna have to provide um, insurance for the amount of production and timetables and how much you can produce at a given point at a given time. So this is one of the actors you will have to discuss with, or you can position yourself with, if you have if you're more interested in the economic side of energy, the less the technical side, but more the economic side. those are the actors you will need to talk about to talk with. Um, Another distinction I wanted to make today is how you're gonna be using, in my sense, how this is a personal opinion, so you're free to correct me or discuss or ask whatever question. But if I was in your stead, in your country, I position myself using your natural resources and your large government programs as your renewable energies will need to answer different needs and will be complementary with your use of non-renewable energies, so either fossil fuel or nuclear. What I mean by that is that the traditional sectors of energy, so those the ones that rely on non-renewable energies, fossil fuel, nuclear, they require heavily centralized infrastructure. So you can't really go around. You have to have a supply chain for the supply of raw material. You need to have big facilities because these are very well, these are machines that reach their, well, an interesting efficiency only above a certain scale. And this scale limit is much higher for fossil fuels and nuclear. So those big programs will serve one purpose, is to well, they serve several purposes, but their purpose is basically provide energy uh, with reliability, provide energy for innovation, and provide energy that's stable and that ensures your grid can function even though some of its parts, individual parts, may not be working. So, what I mean by that is, sure, you can have decentralized renewable energy. That's the idea, but you're gonna need some energy at some times where you're not gonna have renewable energies, renewable resources available. So those are the time where you're gonna need to rely on traditional power plants. The mistake I want to focus on is to not fall for the trap of the resource curse. So I didn't mention it the last time. The resource curse is an economic theory that a country with an abundance of natural resources have lower economic growth or rates of democracy or poorer development outcomes than countries with fewer natural resources. So it's a paradox because obviously you have a country with more resources, but it's not investing it's the profit it's making from those resources into the other economic sectors of the country. And that's an issue you don't want to run into. It's going to be tempting. You do have a lot of infrastructure, you have a lot of inertia. It's going to be tempting to keep investing in those traditional resources, but you will have to invest part of the profits that you will be making from providing energy um, through the traditional sources. You're going to have to inject that money into making a more modern and resilient grid. And that means energy that can be provided with something that's decentralized and specialized, because you're talking about projects that are not, uh, well, we're talking about projects, renewable energy projects that serve a different purpose. So big big traditional plants, they serve the idea that everyone needs to have access to energy steadily at an acceptable level. It's going to ensure you don't have constant blackouts, because that's going to be a strain on your grid. So This is the whole point of having those plants. But if you want to build the energy economy that will put Iran as one of the main actors in its regions, you will have to build innovation from your natural resources. What I mean by that is I'll give you some example, and more specifically, I will focus the second hour of this talk on the work I did in my master's thesis, which is offshore photovoltaic platforms and how they can be used for European grid. And in the second part of this talk, I will be talking about the potential of this technology for Persia, how you may want to focus on certain aspects where the stakes are, where you're going to need some focus, like maybe you're going to need some industry in some other places. I'm going to give you some findings of my work. What I want you to do is apply those findings to your context. Once again, I did my work in the context of Europe. It's a very, very, very different geopolitical and economic context with regards in regards with Iran. So I'm going to give you some key findings about my master thesis and also some sources if you want to dig into it. I do think it's a very interesting lead for the future of renewable energies for Iran. But we'll be talking more about this in the second part of this talk, so starting from 5 p.m. Just to finish my point, the idea is that traditional power plants will provide this stability and this protection against blackouts. But what your renewable energies will provide is expansion. Expansion, what I mean by expansion is expansion that serves human development in the sense that you will make energy accessible at a reasonable price with sustainable means to your fellow citizens all across the country, and even a bit maybe later when some partnerships are you'll be able to create partnerships with your neighboring countries and have something to offer, something that they're going to need, because that is something that's going to be needed in this century anyway. So making the right decisions today to shape your energy sector is going to be defining for your geopolitical relationship with your neighbors. Uh, to give you something on the top of my head, you have a neighboring country, Afghanistan, who just underwent a uh, deeply influential transformation in terms of political regime and social development. You also have a legacy of 20 years of war in this country. So you have a whole generation of people who are trained for war, who are not trained engineers, who are not trained technicians, and who will be asking for development, asking for energy, because that's one of their needs. The best way to at least make sure they're not trying to cross the border and cause trouble and, well, disrupt your energy grid. So, once again, autonomy, self sufficiency, and reliance redundancy. So, making sure your grid is safe from neighboring countries. Well, one argument can be, well, we do have a surplus of an energy to sell. Do you want to have that instead of trying to take it away? Um, I know it sounds very naive and very distant, but that's how like you're gonna prove a system that doesn't work. Like prove wrong a system that doesn't work. You're going to offer them things that they need, things that they will rely on. And if you have the power to just push a button and they don't have access to energy, they're gonna that's gonna piss them off, but they're not gonna want to react too harshly, because the next time they just won't have energy if they try too hard to put pressure on you, on your country at least. So the idea is that um, you have, so the traditional plants, and the rest will serve to provide uh, energy quickly, in the sense of, well, we have in France nuclear plants who are like 40 years old, or like between 20 and 40 years old, and we're having an issue, which is they're all past their expiry date. We haven't really started seriously to build new nuclear plants, and it takes something like 10 to 20 years to build some. So if you're relying on that for immediate, like, supply of energy, that's not going to work. You're going to need something in the meantime, and might as well harness the resources that are free, that are not dependent on supply from other countries. Like, for example, even nuclear, uh, you have your reserve of uranium or whatever, or whichever fuel you're going to use, but you're going to want, once again, redundancy. So if you have your own supply, your own country supply, sure, it's great. But if it falls apart, your supply chain, you're going to need to have supplies from other countries. And that's where you're going to need to be able to sit down at a negotiation table. Um, so that's the whole point of having this surplus of energy that is clean, that is available locally, but also at the same time that can be injected in a more uh, a bigger, larger grid, to use the surplus of energy that's necessarily going to happen when you have renewable energies, since it's really difficult to maintain the balance between consumption and production. Sure, you'll have some times where your renewable energies are not able to meet your energy needs in terms of consumption, but since it's, well, for now, energy storage is still at its early stages in terms of maturity. You don't really have a way, for example, to efficiently, like very efficiently, store energy um, from one season to the other. Once again, you have dams which use hydroelectric energy. That's your best bet to store energy in large quantity, in terms of amount of energy, and in terms of ability to get your production at a certain level with relative control of your reserves. Remember last time we talked about reserves in case of blackouts. Um, so apart from dams, and I think if I understood correctly, there are some dams in Iran, but some of them were unfortunately poorly constructed. So you will have to work on rehabilitating those, because that's going to be one of your best bet for energy storage um, in the long term, in terms of having a high, well, not necessarily high specific energy, but com- compensating the fact that we haven't really found a really great way to have high specific energy, um, with also like rotating machines that are able to provide stability and a controllable amount of power with a wide range of power to meet the needs of the different reserves for the stability of your grid. What else can I say? What else is I going to say? Yeah, so once again, what I want you to get from this first part of the class is to have um, really this approach to energy where you draw your production uh, based on what need you are meeting. And with the evolution of renewable energies and fossil fuels currently, I think those are the two main uh, like differences in approach, in terms of approach, in terms of use of produced energy. If you want to take a reasonable route, you use your big centralized energy sources to create innovation, to provide human development and development in other energy sectors. You provide a grid that's able to take different shapes, different means of energy. You're going to have to focus also on the infrastructure. What is the best infrastructure? I will talk more about this because this also concerns the second hour of this talk, because especially in my thesis, the infrastructure was one of the defining points for the analysis, the economic analysis of the feasibility of this technology. And it's also a huge lead on how your traditional energy sectors, energy production sectors, are going to help you with innovations with regards in regards to the newer innovations in terms of renewable energies. Um, I'll give you a short example so you have an idea of what I'm talking about, so it's not just all abstract concepts. But one of the main issues that the current feasibility simulations of offshore photovoltaic plants in Europe, one of the main problems they are running into is just reading the message quickly. Yeah, okay. The sorry. Yes, one of the main issues it's running into right now is that it's most of the papers that discuss this technology all take the same hypothesis. It's a hypothesis that came from a specific paper, which used a specific hypothesis on the export cable, the offshore technology. Um, and I don't want you to fall in the same trap, because that's gonna be a huge. Sorry, I just got a message. That's gonna be a huge problem if you want to evaluate the technical and economic feasibility of this technology for your country. And it's also a lead because the infrastructure you are able to build is infrastructure you are able to either export or land, or at least use as leverage once again geopolitically. And you can rely on your traditional energy grid, since, for example, one of the main components that's going to be needed is ships that can lay cables, submarine cables. And you do have a navy. You have a navy, you have a lot of coastline, you have a lot of oil. That's the current technologies. So that's another industry per se, the marine industries, the shipbuilding industry. but it's going to be one of your main leverage when you're talking about energy autonomy in your sector, in your region. Sorry, because once the oil starts not selling as well, you're going to need new products, new specialized products that meet the new needs for oil. And what best way than to use that as a leverage for innovation in the renewable industries? So that will be some of the things we will be talking about in the second hour. um, I saw that the meeting is well, this meeting will end 1 hour after it started. So there's a new link for the second hour. Right now, we're gonna have a break because I need a break. I don't know about you guys, but okay, guys. So in this second hour, I will share with you some of the findings I uh, from my master thesis on offshore photovoltaic plants. The idea is that I found results for Europe, but more importantly, what I did is so I was given the responsibility of providing a cost model estimation of photovoltaic plants in Europe. How I want you to see this talk about my master's thesis is how you can adapt the reasoning to evaluate this technology for your own country. um, Obviously, I did put something in emphasis. I have some figures, I have some equations, but they can be used directly. So what I want you to do is I'll present my findings and you think about how it would adapt to your country. That's about as much knowledge I can share with you. Once again, I know a lot of you have way more experience in the sector than I do. I'm not going to pretend I'm a teacher. So, how about I share something I actually worked on and did some research on and found something new on? To give you a bit of an introduction of what's offshore photovoltaic, where it comes from, and where, sorry, there we go. Why there is offshore photovoltaic anyway. So here's what it looks like. Some examples of projects. Some of those have gained a lot of traction. So to give you a bit of the history, so photovoltaic systems, uh, yeah, we've used them in an industrial scale for, let's say, 30 to 20 years. Interest was gained for floating photovoltaic systems because the main issue of photovoltaics is specific energy density, sorry, in the sense that it has very low energy density compared to other sources of renewable energy. So that means you need huge swathes of land to deploy those systems. And in some places where there's human occupation of land, and that's going to be the cases where you need energy, that can create trouble because the land that you use may need to be used for other purposes. So the main one is going to be agriculture. And yeah, keep, I want to give everyone a reminder. Food is priority over energy. If we don't have anything to eat, there's no question about having electricity. So keep that in mind in terms of priorities. Just because you need to deploy energy systems doesn't mean that other sectors have less priority. You need to work with the constraints of other and economic sectors, and ideally work in symbiosis with them, meaning the energy you produce is available in the closest form, closest location, closest uh, in terms of uh, time of production and time of consumption. So chronologically, it needs to be as close as possible. And once again, once you have land occupation for another purpose, so either urbanization or use for agriculture, well, you don't want to use too much of your land uh, for energy. So that's one way to not use land. And something that's quite interesting is, so it's got different ways it can be deployed. Um, what you see, those big triangles, is one of the ways, like one of the classes, because now there are 4 main classes of offshore photovoltaic floating platforms. You'll see this in most papers, this diagram. To give you a quick summary of the different offshore floating technologies. So you have the pontoon types. Those types of plants separate the solar panels from the water, so they're not directly in contact. There's something floating between the panels and the water, and the superficial. They put the solar panels in contact with the water. So different approaches. I'm going to quickly explain what the different approaches try to achieve. As of yet, this is so floating photovoltaics was at first used on lakes, on artificial reservoirs. The main reason being it's way easier when you don't have too much wind, when you don't have waves, when you don't have corrosion by sea salt. So that was the best way to introduce floating photovoltaics. And I want to raise your attention to the fact that floating photovoltaics, for example, in China, has now reached the staggering number of, if I take the not the IRA, IEA, sorry, Traditional Energy Agency. So yeah, China is, in terms of floating photovoltaics, they're the main ones, and they have 10 gigawatts by late 2024. That's huge. That's for those of you who, for those of you who do not have like orders of magnitude. Currently in France, for example, we have, I'd say, the average power plant in terms of photovoltaics on land is around, let's say, 10 to 50 megawatts. A single offshore wind turbine deployed in Europe is around 10 megawatts. And nuclear reactors in France run around 0.5 to 2 gigawatts. So this is basically the equivalent to, something like 10 to like 5 to 10 nuclear power plants. So this is a huge, huge potential Once again, 2/3 of the planet is covered of with water. If you have reservoirs, you're in a region with a very hot climate. That's also a very good way to prevent and limit the vaporization of water. So water turning into yeah, steam. So a way to not waste water. And so that's nice. So floating photovoltaics is definitely the way to go first in terms of photovoltaics if you want to solve the issue of land occupation and prevent to prevent drought from water that's drying in this on the surface, for example, for reservoirs, for agriculture, and those kinds of uses. This is an excellent way. It's been very well explored now, especially by China. So kind of pains me to say this, but yeah, Europe's not necessarily gonna be your best partner for this technology. As much as I want you guys to buy European stuff, uh, China is leading the way. So you have the opportunity to have the place that Persia has always had, which is to be the link between Europe and Asia. Um, in this case, that's going to be China. And in the meantime, what you can do by being in this central position, especially with neighboring countries building and transport infrastructure, is to build a specific infrastructure of this technology. Sure, most of it is they didn't reinvent the wheel. Obviously, most of it is very, very similar to a ground photovoltaic plant. But there are going to be some things that are specific to this technology, and that's something you can focus on. Um, Another big uh, advantage, one of the big pros of having this time offshore photovoltaics. So once again, I'll show you the different classes. Um, so as I said, a good way to reduce evaporation is to put some solar panels. And why is that a good reason? Because obviously, so the water that was warmed by solar rays, as you know, water is absorbs solar rays, so it gets warmer. That's how you get evaporation. And if you want to if you want to limit this heating of the water, you put some panels in between, and with lower temperatures, solar panels function at a higher efficiency. So you get a win-win situation where you lower your evaporation and you increase your the efficiency of your solar panels. So this diagram kind of sucks because it doesn't represent very well what the classes are. I've never actually found a really good one, but I'm gonna explain to you what are the key differences in the design, like the main designs that are coming out of the different pilot projects that are happening right now. Because this technology, offshore photovoltaic, is still at an early stage in terms of technological maturity. So it's definitely worth looking into if you are looking for innovation in the energy sector and trying to build essential components for those new kinds of plants. Uh, it's a very, very interesting topic to look into. So five types of classes. So two main types, pontoon types. So those ones focus on not putting the panels directly on the water. They range from class 1 to class 3. Class 1 is basically you have some floaters. You put on some solar panels, you put them out on sea, and you have other floating platforms that are dedicated to your EBOS. So EBOS is short for electrical balance of wait base of yeah no balance of system. Keep mixing those two up. The idea is you build like barges that can carry solar panels. The modularity is going to be how many panels you can deploy. It's a solution that works well on reservoirs, on lakes, because it's pretty cheap, it's reliable, keeps the solar panels from being in direct contact with the water most of the time. So you can use pretty much average solar panels uh, in lakes and in reservoirs. It gets a bit more complicated for offshore use, especially when you start having a lot of wind, a lot of wave heights. It's a bit more difficult to deploy class 1. But the main use cases, as I said, is yeah, having those either on lakes and reservoirs or close to the shore. And this might seem like a waste of potential. You're doing this. Well, it's can be tempting to do it close to the shore, but as we'll see, there are other reasons to put it farther from the shore. So this one can be used in offshore contexts with, for example, ports or plants for desalinization. So places near shore that need a lot of power and have and are somehow like in some way protected from environmental strains, mostly wind and waves. So what you're going to be looking for is bays, gulfs, anywhere like near shore, like for harbors as well. Um, Anywhere near shore where you don't have too harsh mid-ocean conditions, but where you still have a big, well, an isolated place, an isolated grid. It's very useful for islands as well. If you have islands that require, I don't know if there are any islands in either of the coast, on either of the coast of Iran. Not familiar enough, unfortunately, with the geography. But if you have small islands, that can be very interesting because it allows, well, typically islands are like the biggest example of a place where land occupation is essential. You need to uh, keep as much land as you can for the needs of the inhabitants, whether it be their houses, their food, the water. So if you're able to move the energy production off land, you're meeting a huge, like you're solving a huge problem for islands as well. Class 2 OFPV is basically single PV modules on single floaters. The idea is this is the the system that's easiest to deploy. You just need plastic, basically. In the other one here, you can see. I don't know how if you can see my pointer really well, but uh, the floaters above them, there are some metallic structures to hold the panels, as it is the case in ground PV. Here, each panel has its own individual link to a floating platform. So this allows the different platforms to be uh, well, to not be linked mechanically, at least be linked with a dynamic link. It serves a different purpose. The idea is that enables additional modularity. It makes maintenance easier. You can separate individual panels. You can isolate different panels. It's made for smaller scale projects because it's basically plastic and it's not very resistant, so you can't really deploy it at very, very large scales. But what you can do is deploy it for pretty much like a neglectable cost on reservoirs and lakes. You just need to find a suitable floater, and what you do need to focus about that's different with the class 1 is the cables that link the different modules together. You're going to have dynamic cables instead of static cables, so that means more maintenance. And since you now have mechanical strains on the string cables and maybe even the array cables in some cases, depending on your plant architecture. But that's definitely something you want to keep in mind because that's going to define your maintenance cost. You're saving basically in the capital expenditure, so capex, the initial investment, but you might need to replace your parts more frequently. And fortunately, it's also a system that's suited for this. So, and once again, very, very well suited for reservoirs, lakes, and also nearshore applications. Uh, it can be useful because I'll show you an example of some of my fellow French citizens who are working on this type of plant. And as you can see on well, you can't really see it here. I don't know where. I can't find the picture anymore. But wait, hold on. Basically, those types of plant, I've seen them being carried by jet skis. So you really don't need huge boats, huge ships, which can make them very interesting if you have ideal mid-ocean conditions, so environmental conditions near shore. I'll see if I find. So there's a very telling picture of this. One second. Close to. Yeah, anyway, I can't find it, but yeah, basically it's super light. You can deploy it fast. You can, those platforms, they made it so that you can assemble a bunch of them on land and then carry those huge like surfaces of solar panel one at a time, and then you connect those different um, like power plants parts so that you have a huge like an entire connected plant. So that was class 2. Once again, the idea is to have light floaters, very cheap ones, very inexpensive ones. You do need to have the condition to have either good conditions, or you can make the decision to do what a fellow student from Politecnico di Torino did. He was actually working with the same professors as I did, and he did a paper which I will try to at least share on the chat about the different conditions at which different platforms work. So this is pretty much raw technical data. If you find the right data sources, you can use his results to find, yeah, can we deploy this type of class, is it suitable? Because it will be less expensive if we use, for example, class 2, but do the conditions allow us to do this? There's a whole paper dedicated to this, so I'll share it with you. Last one is class 3. So class 3 is not this one. Well, they're close to, yeah, no, those ones basically, kind of. Those ones as well. They're defined by basically being large platforms uh, who keep the solar panels above weight height, above any like form of water. And the idea of those plants is to be able to deploy solar panels where the other two classes couldn't for environmental reasons. So the idea is, one, you have a structure that's strong enough to withstand the environmental conditions and the mechanical strains, and two, you're keeping your electric material, like your EBOS, as I said. So all the electrical components surrounding your solar panels, and your solar panels, you're keeping them uh, off range from the waves, so they're much less prone to faults due to corrosion, due to bad installations, so those types of problems. And you can deploy them farther from the shore. Another main application, which you can see on there, you cannot necessarily see that it's large platforms, but they can be used to build hybrid plants. Now, why would you want to build hybrid plants? The reason is that so wind energy, you do have, I think, in the north of Iran, you have um, offshore wind turbines. If I'm not mistaken, in the north of the country. Um, but yeah, what can be interesting is, if you're familiar with the notion of capacity factor. So for those of you who are not familiar, capacity factor is how much of the energy available your system is able to harness. So it's expressed as a ratio, a percentage of the amount of energy that's available in terms of nominal deployed uh, capacity, like how much you're able to harness versus how much you're in theory able to harness. And that for solar and wind, it's very dependent on the weather conditions, the seasonality, and the time of the day. And fortunately, they show relatively high complementarity. Um, so no, hybrid. Um, Basically, your solar production and your wind production are gonna be like not at their maximum at the same time. Here you can see solar is way higher in the summer. So in the summer, once again, this is Germany, so you need to adapt to. I know Iran's in the northern hemisphere, but you do need to be careful about applying directly those results. Um, Keep in mind where your production is highest. And as you can see, so wind is higher in the winter for Germany. It's going to be mostly the same for Iran. I'm just once again making sure to check those kinds of stuff. And as you can see, so this is the capacity factor. This is from, I don't know whose paper, Frank Caspar. I believe this guy. So yeah, you have the ability to have a stable capacity factor, so predictable capacity factor as well, because as you can see, it also varies quite a lot, and it varies also at a daily scale. So both in terms of season and in terms of time of the day. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find something quickly enough. But yeah, how hours of the day, your capacity factor for solar is actually might be, yeah, those are hybridization. Yeah, okay. As you can see, so this is the percentage of hybridization, if I'm not mistaken. Average net capacity factor. Yeah. So solar and wind, you find the right uh, distribution between the two. Here, for example, if you want something that's very stable, you're gonna want to, like in the case of Germany, wind is gonna be more stable. They have more stable wind across the day. If you want to increase your production in the middle of the day at certain times, you can use this ratio for hybrid plants to adapt your capacity factor to your needs. Once again, there's no curve here that's better than the other. There's only curves that are suited for certain needs. So you can play on this ratio and have hybrid plants that meet your needs at certain times of the day. For example, well, if we take a look at the 60-40%, it's not a miracle, but if you look at the production, it solves one of the big problems of solar, which is the solar duck curve. I think I did mention it last time. Um, Once again, if you look at the need of energy uh, in nations where it was studied, so once again, keep those results with a grain of salt. Those are results from specific economies. So it seemed to have worked quite well for the US and Europe. I invite you to do the same work in for Iran. But basically, what was observed is that the so the production of solar obviously looks like this kind of. Uh, well, actually, it looks like. Well, anyway, so yeah, so that's generation. So obviously, generates peak generation is in the middle of the day, and you have this big bell curve, and the need for energy is here, so represented by the load. So the load is the need in terms of energy. As you can see, steadily rises during the day and then comes back down during the night. What happens is when you need to and to have um, when you need to meet this need for energy and you have it at a certain time, it did this kind of curve, and it was the main issue that needed to be solved. Because okay, now we have a solution for this part. What can we do to mitigate those peaks that happened at kind of inconvenient time? um, and one solution is, once again, if you look at the curves of yeah, seasonal, like uh, daily production, you'll see here those inconvenient times. So around the morning, um, around the evening, the wind can pick up, wind production can pick up. Here you'll see, yeah, it's around like I think 7 a.m. something like this, 7 8. This is, yeah, around 6 7 9, 6 7 8 9, something like this. So if we look at the other curve, yeah, 6, you get quite still quite some nice energy production, capacity factor at least. Same thing at the end of the day. So that's one way to solve this problem. Don't remember the duck. Well, remember the duck because it's a fun way to remember it, but don't remember it as a duck. Make your own curve for your own country, even your own city, your own province, your own local consumption, your local production. This is important that you do not use this specific model, which was built in specific cases. So California, it worked, okay. Germany worked. It might not work for Iran. Take the time to study if it applies to your context or not. Um, okay, so back to offshore photovoltaic floating classes. Just a reminder of what I was talking about right before. The idea is that you have those class 3 huge floating platforms that look like this. Takes a bit of heavier equipment to deploy. This is solar dock concept design of hybrid plants, but your wind turbines at sea are going to be in places where wind is where mean wind speed is actually quite high. So the metoceans, the environmental conditions at sea for your photovoltaics might not be ideal for the light types we saw before. So that's where you're going to need some heavier equipment. But I really, really, really encourage you to take a look at the different designs, the available uh, information, like the public information that's available at this point. There isn't much. I'm not going to oversell it. You're going to have to do a lot of the work yourself because right now, sorry, the main results come from companies who are trying out their own projects. So this one, I think, was a solar duck at the beginning. Like it's their patent for a platform, the square-like platform with some like beams below the water to enable the platform to float. They've changed their design to this triangular design. It's not entirely stupid, makes the platform a bit less susceptible to certain mechanical strains. If you look, for example, at the difference between, well, a 3 feet stool and a 4 feet stool, well, a 4 feet stool needs all of those 4 feet to be on the same plane, to be perfectly horizontal. That's not the case for a 3 feet stool. If you have 3 pillars, your plane is insured at all times in the same way that 2 points on a plane are always aligned. So in this case, this enables the platform to be chosen at a given size, which enables it to stay like to not have torsion in the beams. Like the beams won't have as much mechanical strains due to waves. Whereas if you have, for example, a wave that's hitting uh, this pillar, but not the 3 others, where you're gonna have some bending moment here. and this might damage sensitive electrical equipment, especially since one of the main advantages of this technology is that you can use static cables for both string cables and inter-array cables. You can put on your EBOS, so transformers. You can put on your inverters on there. You can even link some of these platforms with their own transformers uh, to and inverters, because you'll see that can be a problem for offshore. I'll talk about it if I have the time. It can be a problem to put on some sensitive mechanical equipment, for example, inverters, which are very sensitive to environmental conditions. You might want to share that with existing electrical infrastructure. So once again, you do have some offshore wind turbines, I think, in the north of the country. You do need to check that. I can't remember if what I'm saying is right, but you do know better. So I'll make my own research, but you guys do know better than I do. So um, the idea is to capitalize on existing projects to increase your capacity, and those kinds of projects can be scaled up also quite easily. One of the findings that I had in my paper was that class 3, although it's meant to be a very sturdy platform and it seems to be quite like an achievement in terms of engineering, especially with the comparison with floating wind turbines, which are a way bigger challenge. Um, the floating platforms for offshore photovoltaics are actually not complex nor that expensive in terms of material. Um, the actual amount of material you need to have a sturdy platform is not that high. It's not that costly. So it is a lead for um, quite like pretty inexpensive um, power plants that offer huge capacity, because you're going to be able to create very large plants, uh, and they're going to be your replacements for the very large plants that use traditional power. Like I mentioned in the first part of the class, once again, the idea is to have redundancy. If you have a nuclear power that's going down, you need to have another power plant running, ready to go. So you need to go from having those traditional power sources to sustainable ones, and that's going to help making your transition, because once again, the idea is use your traditional resources to have a steady base, a steady foundation to make innovation, and those technologies, you specialize them, you make innovation, you create technology that's essential to them, and you make yourself a leading country in one of the main sources of production of power that's easily accessible across the globe. Once again, 2/3 of the planet is the ocean. So if you're able to produce energy at an acceptable cost on the ocean, uh, you're going to find a lot of clients, a lot of customers. Your main issue in terms of geostrategic autonomy is obviously going to be the production of solar panels. That's another big topic, another big area of research. If you want to diversify the economy and especially the energy sector, not rely on a single technology, for example, nuclear, fossil, wind, solar. You diversify. You That's another capability that you can add to your country's autonomy in terms of energy. Quickly about this second category of solar panels, since it was not the main focus of my thesis. So those ones are superficial. The solar panels are directly in contact with the water. So that's going to be these kinds of plants. The main difference between the two being these ones have waterproof PV panels, but the floaters are on the sides. So the panels are in direct contact with the water. Um, this has advantages like pros and cons. Main pro is you maximize the efficiency by in terms of cooling by the water. You have direct contact, so compared to, for example, the pontoon type where you don't necessarily have direct contact with the water, you're going to need to rely on convection as the way to transfer heat between the sea and your PV panels. In this case, you can directly use the convection and conduction. You use conduction between the the sea and your panels, and you can rely on convection directly in the water. So that's going to improve the efficiency of your thermal heat exchanges, but you might lose some efficiency in terms of orientation of your panels. You might lose some efficiency in terms of shading due to unequal coverage of the panels, especially if you have issues like algae, or even, it might sound stupid, but those are actually the problems that people are looking at. Well, I'd use a more polite way to say it, but since we might not meet again in 15 minutes, I'll say it as it is. Bird shit, basically. If you have an island, anything that sticks out of the water in the middle of the ocean, you're gonna have birds landing on your platform, and if they start covering your PV panels, that's not only an issue in terms of the capacity itself, meaning your ability to produce simply because some cells are covered, is going to cause problems of its own, problems that anyone here who has studied solar energy will be familiar with, such as module mismatch, so voltage problems. So this kind of technologies is very susceptible to this kind of mix, so it has to be used. I would say, once again, those two types, and okay, finally, to describe this one is pretty much the same concepts. The main difference being that this is using newer technologies of solar panels, flexible panels actually, and this enables this makes the modules are supposed to be somewhat plastic, so they're able to withstand a level of environmental condition without having too much mechanical strains from repeated mechanical strain cycles. Sorry. So this one is gonna be a bit more suited if you have identified very specifically your environmental conditions. You can pretty much design this one if you have access to the technology. I would not put too much, I wouldn't put, I wouldn't bet too much on this technology for in the short term, because uh, it's more of a research topic right now. The efficiency of the flexible modules is, I don't think as satisfactory as the more classical solar modules. And if it is, definitely not at an industrial scale. So that might be another lead to some research into what your country can provide in the supply chain of floating photovoltaic systems. Once again, the idea is that you become an actor in this sector. You do not just buy from foreign countries. You're able to develop your own economy, your own industry, and you become an essential stakeholder for your country and for your neighboring countries as well. So that's how you become geopolitically more influence without needing hard power, without needing conflict. You provide service to your neighboring country and you have political leverage because of the service you provide. Um, what can I add? Yes. So some key findings about my paper. I'm not able to show much, unfortunately, because I do have some results, but not interestingly presented enough for you to take a look at them. I will link the paper of my fellow student who did his paper on the model, the cost model based on solely the mechanical constraints, the mechanical strains. Mine was more focused on the economic side, on the well, he did the more of the yield part, so how much you can get in terms of solar power, and he explored the possibility of seasonal removal. So that means, for example, in the winter, as we saw, solar is less productive. If you just have higher waves, harsher environmental conditions, and production is not worth it, you might just want to move your platforms back to shore. This will enable preventive maintenance. This will limit well added maintenance because of faults. So his paper explores all this part. What I was more focused on is like what you need to take into account in terms of project development for uh, this technology. So less technical, but more what does the supply chain look like? What's the cost of the raw material looking like? How we can use the existing infrastructure. So this is what led me to have last week's and this week's talk, because you'll see that as economic parameters, defining your supply chain and your architecture is going to be very, very essential. Um, and especially something that is widely overlooked in current papers, and that's definitely worth looking at if you want to explore this topic a little bit more, is the architecture, the offshore architecture. Right now, it's pretty limited. It's limited to simulations of very small plants who use assumptions that are kind of like a mix between floating, well, not floating, but offshore wind and ground PV. But the assumptions are not necessarily made at the right points. For example, I'll raise your attention to the cost of the export cable. It's generally way over uh, overestimated because it uses offshore wind as an example, but the scale of the projects will lead to different infrastructures. So you know how to make a grid on land. The basic components are going to be the same. What you want to do is find out, okay, what's the simplest way to combine marine industry knowledge, make platforms that work as few as possible, as cheap as possible, but at the same time have the most efficient grid in terms of transformers. You're going to start with DC power. You're going to have to see, okay, do I raise the power when it's DC? Do I try to put on as many inverters as I need, uh, um, as many as possible within those like small groups of platforms. That's going to be a decision you're going to have to make. And if you want to work on a very solid lead, you can start making this simulation. And a very good example of how you can um, inspire yourself to model those costs is this website, which I found to be quite interesting because it's basically it's a website that summarizes information that was made on a report by, I don't remember the company, but it's a company that works on offshore wind projects in the UK. They have extensive. They now have an extensive outlook on former on projects that are currently in operation. So they have a way keener insight on the cost of the different subcomponents. But what I want you to take a look at is uh, how they decompose the system, because you'll see very, very quickly that, for example, the export cables are not necessarily the ones that you will use in offshore photovoltaic systems, because they might be oversized. And so the figures that are being used are once again overestimated. So focus on having very specific, don't rely on models that are way too rigid. Find the faults in the models. For example, what I did was finding the faults in like the assumption of the cables, but basically um, once again adapt all those results, but use this as the basis for your reasoning, because this is going to be pretty much what it's going to be. And it's also a good way to identify where your country might be over reliant on external supply chains. Um, for example, in the case of wind, uh, one of our biggest issues in Europe is having the necessary equipment to deploy the wind turbines. So that's not going to be the case, as I said, for offshore photovoltaics. The platforms are way lighter, they're way easier to deploy. So that's not going to be your choke points in terms of supply chain, but that's going to be your job to find within what's been found here. First, what's applicable to. Sorry for the small interruption, guys. Thank you for staying with me. I'm going to conclude soon, so I'm going to free you guys. I'm sure you have other things to do. Um, my camera is not working, so unfortunately, I'm going to have to say goodbye without seeing you guys. Well, without you guys seeing me. But anyways, so once again, what I was getting at, so lots of innovations in the renewable sectors, lots of opportunities to position yourself as industrial um, like actors in your region and outside of your region to supply um, specific equipment, for example, specific machinery to deploy certain things like the mooring and anchoring. You need to anchor your plant to the ground if it's floating, so to the bottom of the sea. So you might want to have specialized technicians, specialized equipment, and that's what you're going to want to look into. And the final remark I have to say is you can also try to link it with what I talked about, the other technology I talked about last time, which is the Pigot wind turbine. If you want to have smaller scale, um, well, uh, power plants. Once again, the idea is having this decentralized, resilient things that are like smaller plants that if something wrong happens to them, or if you need to, you're not overly reliant on them because they're cheap enough and you can deploy enough of them so that you can ensure that you can replace like the production quickly enough so that it doesn't become a major problem in your supply chain in terms of energy. So from your production to your consumption, being able to draw from different sources, from different scales of sources to complement each other, be less reliant on heavily centralized power production, but also to ensure stability of the grid. So work with state stakeholders, but also remember that power is needed at a local scale. Decisions are made at the top down, but you do need the bottom up to determine your energy needs, and that's how you're going to find the best way to produce energy and the best way to be self-sufficient and geopolitically autonomous, because that will allow you to highlight where you are overly reliant on other countries, where they have control over your ability to provide energy to your fellow citizens. So that's also how you get to a position of power in terms of negotiations and geopolitics in your region. You have a service that other countries cannot provide, which is, for example, grid stability or um, sufficient capacity. Once again, the idea is you're providing something, a specific characteristic of your grid that the other countries cannot provide, or even if it's machinery or industry, or think outside of your industry. Don't just think about your own industry, the energy industry. Think about all the industries that can benefit from it and how it's going to help your country become more autonomous and more independent.